The girl in the corner hadn't moved in over an hour. She sat alone at a table meant for 8, her hands folded in her lap, while 500 guests laughed and clinked glasses around her. The scar on her face ran from her left temple down across her cheek, pale wide, impossible to miss. She was the daughter of the most powerful man in the room, and not one person had approached her all evening. Then a waiter set down his tray, walked across the ballroom, and extended his hand to her. "Would you like to dance?" The room went quiet, and when something fell from the waiter's jacket pocket and hit the marble floor, William Harrington, CEO billionaire, the man everyone in that room wanted to impress, went completely still. Daniel Carter had worked 3 jobs in the past 2 years. During the day, he drove for a logistics company out of a depot in the south side of Chicago. On weekends, he helped a friend move furniture and appliances for extra cash. And on certain evenings, the kind that required a white uniform and a willingness to be invisible, he worked event catering for a company that sent staff to venues across the Midwest. And occasionally, when a big contract came through to New York. Tonight was New York. Tonight was the Meridian Hotel in Manhattan, 23rd floor, the Grand Ballroom. Tonight was the 25th anniversary gala of Harrington Global, one of the largest technology conglomerates in the country. Daniel had been briefed on the basics: 500 guests, black tie dress code, heavy hors d'oeuvres from 7 to 9, followed by a formal dinner. Keep the glasses full. Stay out of the way. Do not engage unless spoken to. He had been doing this long enough to know how to disappear in a room full of people. His daughter Lily, 8 years old, currently in the care of his neighbor Mrs. Calloway back in Chicago, had asked him that morning if he would be home by breakfast. He had said yes. He intended to keep that promise. He picked up his tray and moved through the crowd. The ballroom was everything the briefing implied, and more. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from a vaulted ceiling. The marble floor reflected the light from every direction. Men in perfectly fitted tuxedos stood in clusters near the bar, their laughter rehearsed and easy. Women in gowns moved between conversations with the fluid confidence of people who had never once worried about a utility bill. Daniel passed through all of it without making eye contact, without slowing down, refilling glasses, and collecting empties, and doing exactly what he was paid to do. He was halfway through his second pass of the room when he noticed her. She was sitting at a round table near the far wall, the kind of table that should have had 8 people around it, maybe 10. She was alone. Her dress was black floor length, and she wore it with the posture of someone who had spent years learning to take up as little space as possible. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly. From a distance, she looked composed, almost detached, like someone waiting for a meeting to begin. It was only when Daniel moved closer that he saw the scar. It ran from her left temple down across her cheek, wide and pale against her skin. Not the kind of mark that could be covered or minimized, the kind that became the first thing anyone noticed, the thing that reorganized a person's face in the eyes of every stranger. Daniel registered it the way he registered most things, quickly, without expression. And then he moved on. He was about to turn back toward the bar when he heard it. 2 men stood near the pillar to his left, both of them young, both in suits that probably cost more than Daniel made in a month. One of them leaned toward the other and said something low, and they both smiled in the direction of the corner table. Daniel didn't catch the words. He didn't need to. He had been around enough cruelty in his life to recognize the shape of it, even at a distance. He looked at the woman again. She was staring at the centerpiece on the table, a tall arrangement of white flowers, with the practiced stillness of someone pretending not to hear things they had heard 100 times before. Daniel kept moving. He refilled a glass at the adjacent table, collected an empty from the next one, and told himself it wasn't his business. He was a catering employee at a private corporate event. His job was to serve drinks and stay invisible. He had a shift that ended at 11 and an early morning back in Chicago, and a daughter who needed him functional and employed. He told himself all of that. He circled the room twice more. Each time the corner table was still empty, except for her. Each time the two men near the pillar found something else to smile about. And each time Daniel noticed William Harrington, a tall, silver-haired man at the center of the room, who was clearly the host, clearly the most important person present, glanced toward that corner table with an expression that was harder to read. Not indifference, something closer to helplessness. The orchestra had been playing background music for the better part of an hour, quiet, atmospheric, the kind of thing designed to fill silence without demanding attention. Then the tempo shifted. The conductor raised his baton, and the ensemble moved into something slower, more deliberate. A waltz. On cue, couples began drifting toward the center of the floor. The room rearranged itself around the dance floor, and the corner table became even more exposed, even more isolated, as the crowd thinned around it. Olivia Harrington did not move. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the floor fill with people, and her expression did not change. But something in the set of her shoulders, the way they held just a fraction too rigid, just a degree too controlled, told Daniel everything he needed to know about what it cost her to sit there and not react. He thought about Lily. His daughter was 8 years old and had recently started a new school in a neighborhood where she didn't know anyone yet. He had driven her on the first day and watched her walk through the front doors alone, her backpack too big for her frame, her chin tilted up in that specific way. She had not quite confident, but determined not to show it. He had sat in the car for 10 minutes after the doors closed, unable to make himself drive away. He thought about what it felt like to be the only person in a room who wasn't sure they belonged there. He set his tray down on a service station near the wall. He straightened his jacket. He crossed the ballroom floor, moving at a steady pace, not rushed, not hesitant, until he reached the corner table and stopped in front of her. Olivia looked up. Her eyes were dark and guarded the look of someone who had learned to anticipate whatever was coming next. Daniel extended his hand, palm up the way he had been taught a long time ago, in a context that had nothing to do with ballrooms or galas. "Would you like to dance?" She stared at his hand, then at his face. Her expression cycled through several things in the space of a few seconds: surprise, suspicion, and something underneath both of those that Daniel recognized but couldn't name. "You're one of the waiters," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like a person checking whether what they were seeing was actually real. "Yes," Daniel said. She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the nearest guests had already begun to notice. Daniel could feel the attention without looking for it, the way conversation dropped and register, the way bodies angled slightly in their direction. He kept his eyes on her. "If you'd rather not," he said, "I'll go back to work. No issue either way." Olivia looked down at his hand again. Then slowly she placed her hand in his. The whispers started before they even reached the dance floor. Daniel heard them, the way he had learned to hear things in the field, not by focusing on any single voice, but by registering the overall shift in the room's temperature. Conversations dropped. Heads turned. The particular kind of attention that comes not from admiration, but from disbelief settled over the ballroom like a change in air pressure. A man in a gray tuxedo near the bar said something to the woman beside him without bothering to lower his voice. The woman glanced toward the dance floor and raised an eyebrow. Daniel kept walking. Olivia's hand was light in his, and he could feel the tension in it, the slight resistance of someone who had agreed to something and was already reconsidering. He led her to the edge of the dance floor, not the center. He chose a spot where the light was softer and the crowd thinner, where they were visible but not exposed. He turned to face her and placed one hand at a respectful distance on her side, and she settled into the hold with the careful precision of someone who had been taught to dance a long time ago and hadn't done it since. The orchestra was midway through a slow waltz. The tempo was forgiving, "I should tell you," Olivia said quietly, her eyes level with his collar, "that I haven't done this in a few years." "Neither have I," Daniel said. "We'll keep it simple." She looked up at him, then a quick searching look as if she was trying to determine whether he was performing some kind of kindness or whether he actually meant it. Daniel met her eyes and didn't look away, and didn't look toward her cheek, and didn't do any of the things people tended to do when they were trying too hard to seem like they weren't noticing something. They began to move. It was not elegant, not at first. Olivia was cautious in the way people are when they expect to be interrupted, or laughed at, or asked to explain themselves. She held herself slightly apart. Her frame controlled her movements, small. Daniel matched her pace without comment, adjusting his steps to hers instead of the other way around, and gradually over the course of the first minute, the distance between careful and natural began to close. Around them, other couples continued dancing. Not all of them, though. Several had drifted to the edges of the floor, and Daniel was aware of them in his peripheral vision, standing and watching. He did not acknowledge them. He kept his attention on the music and on the woman in front of him, and he counted the beats under his breath, the way Lily had made him practice with her in their kitchen back in Chicago, both of them in their socks on the linoleum floor. Lily insisting he had no rhythm, which was probably still true. "People are staring," Olivia said. Her voice was flat, not wounded, just stating a fact. "Some of them," Daniel said. "Doesn't that bother you?" He considered the question seriously the way it deserved. "I've been in situations where people were trying to actually kill me," he said. "This is easier to manage." Olivia looked up at him again, and this time the look lasted longer. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, like a person updating an assumption they had been carrying for a while. "You're not from this world," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Daniel said. "I'm from Chicago, South Side." She almost smiled. It didn't quite complete itself, but it was close a brief movement at the corner of her mouth that came and went, before it could be read too clearly. Daniel noticed it and said nothing. They danced through the remainder of the first song and into the opening bars of the next. By then the whispers had either stopped or moved far enough away that they no longer registered. The crowd on the dance floor had thinned further, but neither of them moved to leave. The music was slow, and the space was theirs for the moment. And there was something in the rhythm of it, the simple physical fact of two people moving in the same direction at the same time, that made conversation unnecessary. It was Olivia who broke the quiet. "My mother used to dance," she said. She was looking past his shoulder at something that wasn't in the room. She was good at it. She made everyone around her look better than they were. She stopped. Then, she died 3 years ago. Car accident. Daniel didn't offer condolences. He had learned in the years since he came back from Afghanistan that condolences were often more about the person offering them than the person receiving them. Instead, he said, "She sounds like she was the kind of person you remember in rooms like this." "Every room," she said. Across the ballroom at the long table reserved for Harrington Global's executive leadership and board members, William Harrington had stopped talking. His conversation partner, a heavy-set man in a navy suit, who had been making a point about quarterly projections, continued speaking for several seconds, before realizing he had lost his audience entirely. William was standing with a glass of scotch in one hand, and his attention fixed on the far side of the dance floor, where his daughter was moving slowly through a waltz with a man in a white catering uniform. William watched them. His face was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger, the expression of a man confronting something he had wanted for a long time and had not known how to arrange now happening in front of him without his involvement engineered by a stranger he had never seen before tonight. He set his scotch down on the table. He did not move toward the dance floor. He did not call anyone over to intervene. He stood at the edge of his own gala and watched his daughter dance for the first time since her mother's funeral, and he did not say a word. The waltz reached its final phrase. The orchestra drew the melody down to its last notes, and the couples around Daniel and Olivia slowed and stopped, and the room filled with the sound of applause, the polite automatic kind that follows a formal set. Daniel brought them to a stop and released her hand and stepped back a measured distance, the way the situation required. Olivia straightened. The composure was back, immediate and practiced, but it sat differently now, less like armor and more like habit. Her eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been at the beginning of the evening. "Thank you," she said. "My pleasure," Daniel said, and meant it. He reached into his jacket pocket for the small notepad he carried for drink orders, a leftover habit from his first catering shift when he had been terrible at memorizing tables. His hand caught something else instead. He felt it shift, felt his fingers miss the edge of it, and before he could close his grip, the object slipped free and fell. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, clean sound. Olivia looked down. So did Daniel. On the floor between them lay a military identification tag, old, worn at the edges, the metal surface scratched from years of handling. It was not Daniel's. The name stamped into the metal was not Carter. He bent and picked it up quickly, closing his hand around it, but not before Olivia had seen it. Not before she had read the name pressed into the metal in that standard military font block, letters unambiguous. Harrington M. She looked at the closed fist in his hand. Then she looked at his face. At the edge of the room, William Harrington had seen the object fall. He had seen Daniel pick it up. He had not been close enough to read the tag, but he had seen enough the shape of it, the way Daniel's hand moved, the particular stillness that came over the man's face in the moment after. And something in William's chest locked into place with the cold precision of a key finding a lock it hadn't known existed. He began walking toward them. Daniel straightened and looked at Olivia. There was nothing evasive in his expression, but there was the look of a man deciding in real time how much to carry and how much to set down. "That belonged to someone I served with," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "I've kept it a long time." Olivia's eyes stayed on his face. Behind her, she heard her father's footsteps cross the marble floor. She recognized them, had known that particular rhythm her whole life, and she watched something move through Daniel's expression as William Harrington stepped into his line of sight. The two men looked at each other. William's eyes dropped to Daniel's closed hand, then rose again. "May I see that?" William said. It was not the voice he used in boardrooms or press conferences. It was quieter than that. It was the voice of a man asking something personal in a public place and aware of the distance between those two things. Daniel opened his hand. The tag lay flat on his palm, the name facing up. William looked at it for a long moment without touching it. The noise of the ballroom continued around them, glasses, laughter, the orchestra tuning for its next set. But at this particular point on the floor, the three of them existed in a separate kind of quiet. "Where did you get this?" William asked. "He gave it to me," Daniel said. "In Kandahar province, 2 days before he died." William Harrington did not speak for a long time. He stood on the marble floor of his own gala, with the identification tag resting on Daniel's open palm between them, and he looked at his younger brother's name, the way a person looks at something they have spent years learning to live without seeing. The ballroom continued around them. The orchestra had moved into a light conversational piece, and glasses were being refilled at the bar, and 300 conversations were happening simultaneously across the room, and none of it reached them. Olivia stood beside her father and did not move. "Kandahar," William said finally. The word came out flat and careful, the way people say things they have rehearsed in private, but never expected to say out loud. "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "Jari District. November 12 years ago." William raised his eyes from the tag to Daniel's face. He was looking for something specific, not doubt, not verification, but the particular quality of a man who had actually been there, who carried the geography of that place in his body, the way soldiers do as weight rather than memory. He found it. His jaw shifted. "You served under Michael," William said. "Captain Harrington was my commanding officer for 14 months, Daniel said. "He was the best officer I served under in 2 tours. That's not something I say to make you feel better. It's just true." William nodded once slowly and looked back down at the tag. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what happened." Daniel had told this story before, to a military chaplain, to a VA counselor, once to a reporter who had been writing a piece about the engagement and had ultimately not used his account. Each time the telling was different depending on who was listening and what they needed from it. He looked at William Harrington and understood what this man needed. Not a summary, not a carefully managed version with the difficult parts smoothed over. The real one. "We were on a route clearance mission," Daniel said. 8 of us. Captain Harrington was on point because one of our lead scouts had gone down with a fever 2 days before, and we were short. We hit an ambush about 4 kilometers out from the forward operating base. Coordinated fire from 3 positions came at us fast. 2 men went down in the first 30 seconds. He stopped. Not for effect, but because the next part required a different kind of attention to get right. I was pinned behind a vehicle that had taken damage. I couldn't move to my left without crossing open ground. Captain Harrington crossed it. He came across 30 meters of open ground under direct fire to get to my position. He pulled me behind cover, and he was hit doing it. The ballroom did not go quiet. It simply continued indifferent to the conversation at its center. But around the 3 of them, the nearest guests had gradually stopped talking, drawn by something in the posture of the people in the small circle. The stillness of it, the weight, without understanding why. "He was conscious for a while after," Daniel said. "Long enough to give orders, long enough to make sure the rest of the team consolidated. He gave me the tag before the medevac arrived. He said..." Daniel stopped again. He looked at William directly. He said, "Give this to my brother if I don't make it back. Tell him I was doing my job." Those were his words. William's hand came up and covered his mouth briefly. His eyes did not close. He was the kind of man who had spent decades in rooms full of people who were watching him, and some habits ran too deep to break even now. But his hand was not entirely steady when he lowered it. Olivia reached out and touched her father's arm. It was a small gesture. Quiet, and William turned to look at her with an expression that had nothing corporate in it. Just a father. Just grief. Just the specific exhaustion of carrying something heavy for a very long time, without being able to put it down. "You've had this for 12 years, Olivia said to Daniel. Her voice was careful. "You kept it." "I tried to find the family twice," Daniel said. "I wasn't good at that kind of search when I came back. I wasn't good at a lot of things for a while." He looked at William. "I'm sorry it took this long." William shook his head once firmly, as if refusing the apology on principle. He reached out and took the tag from Daniel's palm and held it with both hands, and looked at it, the way a person looks at something they thought they had lost permanently and are now afraid to believe they are actually holding. Then William Harrington turned around to face his ballroom. What happened next was not loud. It was not theatrical. William did not raise his voice or call the room to attention or demand a microphone. He simply turned, and something in the way he turned the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of his stillness, caused the nearest conversations to drop, and then the ones beyond those spreading outward through the room in a slow wave until the orchestra noticed and the conductor let the music trail off, and the ballroom was for the first time all evening genuinely quiet. 500 people looked at William Harrington. He looked at the 2 men near the pillar, the ones in the expensive suits, who had been smiling in his daughter's direction earlier in the evening. He knew their names. He had shaken their hands at the beginning of the night and asked about their families. He looked at them now, with an expression that required no elaboration. "I'd like you both to leave," William said. Quietly. Clearly. "Tonight is not the right room for you." Neither man argued. The room watched them walk to the exit, and the room said nothing. And when the doors closed behind them, the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. William turned back to the ballroom. He stood for a moment with his brother's tag in one hand, and then he looked at his daughter. Olivia was already moving. She stepped forward, not toward her father, not toward Daniel, but toward the center of the room, the open space in front of the orchestra that functioned as the evening's informal stage. She had not planned this. It was visible in the way she moved, the slight uncertainty in her first step, the way she straightened herself as she went, as though assembling her resolve in real time. She stopped in the open space and faced the room. For a moment she simply stood there, and 500 people waited, and the scar on her face was fully visible under the chandeliers, and she did not turn away from the light. "I have spent 3 years trying to be invisible in rooms like this," Olivia said. Her voice was clear. It carried without effort. "I got good at it. I got good at finding the table in the corner, and keeping my face turned, and pretending I didn't hear what people said when they thought I wasn't listening." She stopped. Her chin lifted slightly. "I'm not going to do that anymore." The room held its breath. "I have a scar," she said. "It's not going away. It's been part of my face for 3 years, and it will be part of my face for the rest of my life, and I'm done apologizing for it with my posture." She looked out at the crowd, not searching for anyone in particular, just looking, letting herself be seen. "My mother died in that accident. I didn't. I used to feel guilty about that. I'm working on feeling something else instead." Nobody applauded. It wasn't that kind of moment. The room stayed quiet, and the quiet was respectful, and that was better. Olivia stepped back from the center of the room. Her father was there when she turned, and he put his arms around her in the straightforward way of a man who had run out of complicated alternatives, and she let him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. William released her and turned to Daniel. "I want to offer you a position at Harrington Global," William said. His voice had recovered its steadiness, but the boardroom quality was still absent. This was not a business offer. It was something more personal than that dressed in business language, because that was the vocabulary available to him. "Whatever role fits your background, name the terms, and we'll make it work." Daniel looked at him. He had expected something like this, not exactly this, but something in this direction, and he had spent the last several minutes, while everything else was happening, figuring out what he actually wanted to say. "I appreciate that," Daniel said. "I mean it. But I'm going to say no." William studied him. "Why?" "Because I'm in the middle of building something," Daniel said. "It's not impressive yet. It's a logistics route and a truck and a schedule that barely works. But it's mine, and my daughter knows what it looks like when her father builds something from nothing. And I think that's worth more to her right now than a good salary and a title." He looked at William steadily. "Your brother understood that kind of thinking. He talked about it, about doing the work in front of you because it's the work in front of you." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded a slow nod, the kind that means a person has heard something true and is deciding where to file it. "Your daughter," William said. "How old, Nibate?" Daniel said. "What's her name?" "Lily." William nodded again. He looked down at the tag in his hand, then back up. "I'm going to set up an education fund for Lily Carter," he said. "Full tuition wherever she wants to go whenever she's ready. That's not negotiable, and it's not charity. It's something I should have done years ago for the man who gave me back this." He closed his fingers around the tag. "You're the closest thing I have to that." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Not resistance, not gratitude exactly, but the particular stillness of a man absorbing something he had not allowed himself to expect. "All right," Daniel said. Olivia had been standing a few feet away watching the two of them. When Daniel turned, she was looking at him with the same directness she had used on the dance floor, not performing anything, not managing anything, just looking. "I won't forget you," she said. It was simple. It was the kind of thing people say, and sometimes mean it, often don't. Daniel looked at her face. The scar, the steadiness behind her eyes, the particular quality of a person who has just done something difficult and is still standing. And he believed her. "Take care of yourself," he said. He picked up his tray from the service station where he had left it. He moved back through the ballroom, refilling the last few glasses of the evening, doing the work in front of him, the way he always did. By 11 o'clock, most of the guests had gone. The catering staff moved through the emptied room collecting linens and stacking chairs. The chandeliers had been dimmed to a low amber light that made the ballroom look smaller than it had at the height of the evening, more human. Daniel was loading equipment onto a cart near the service entrance when he heard music. Someone had left the orchestra's sheet music on the conductor's stand, but the sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the center of the room. He looked up. Olivia was dancing alone in the empty ballroom. No partner, no audience, no orchestra, just a melody. She was humming to herself, barely audible across the distance. Her movements were unhurried. Her face was turned up toward the dimmed chandeliers, and she wasn't thinking about who was watching because there was no one left to watch. Her father stood at the edge of the room near the main doors, his jacket off his brother's tag in his hand. He was watching her the way people watch things they were afraid they might never see again. Daniel watched for a moment. Then he turned back to his cart and finished loading it, and pushed it through the service entrance, and the door closed behind him with a quiet sound that no one in the ballroom heard. Outside, Manhattan was cold and bright and indifferent in the way cities are at midnight. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Calloway's number back in Chicago. The line rang twice. He heard Mrs. Calloway's voice, steady and familiar, telling him Lily had gone to sleep an hour ago without any trouble. He thanked her. Then, on an impulse, he asked her to hold the phone near the door of Lily's room for just a second. There was a shuffling sound. Then, from somewhere small and dark and far away, he heard his daughter breathing in her sleep, slow, even completely untroubled. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Hotel for a moment, after he hung up his breath, visible in the cold air, his hands in his pockets. Then he started walking toward the subway. He had an early morning. He had work to do.